A quiet weekend visit turned into a moment that completely reshaped how I viewed my past, my identity as a mother, and the silent questions we carry around for decades without ever asking. Before I share this memory with you, please take a moment to like this video, share your own thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this moment that has stayed close to my heart for years. I honestly thought that weekend would pass just like all the others. I remember the house was filled with the smell of brewing coffee and the rhythmic, familiar ticking of the old ceiling fan, a sound that has been the heartbeat of this home for as long as I can remember. By the front door sat his suitcase, the leather scuffed at the corners from years of airports and road trips. He had called a few days prior, mentioning he was passing through town and wanted to stop by. There was nothing unusual about that. He was a grown man now with his own life, his own career, his own schedule to keep. Over the years, our visits had become shorter, more intentional, but often filled with the polite, surface-level updates of two adults busy with their own worlds. Yet, when he walked through the door, I didn't see the man in his 30s. For a split second, I saw flashes of the boy who used to race his bicycle down the street, knees grass-stained and laughter echoing off the pavement. I'm in my 50s now, old enough to notice how the house seems to shrink a little each year, how the silence settles in heavier than it used to. You learn to live with that quiet. You don't fight it, you make room for it. That's what I told myself as I folded towels in the laundry room while he leaned against the doorframe, talking about work, the traffic on the highway, and the rising price of gas. Ordinary things. Safe things. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where algebra homework was once spread out like a battlefield. Now, the late afternoon light came in low through the window, catching dust motes dancing in the air. He watched me stir the soup like it was a task of great importance. That should have been my first clue. When you've known someone their entire life, you develop a sense for when their words are circling something else. After dinner, we didn't rush to turn on the television. We sat with the hum of the refrigerator and the clock that never quite kept perfect time. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. That was when he asked it. A simple question. "Mom," he said softly, "were you happy back then?" He didn't mean now. He meant back then. The early years. The hard years. I didn't answer right away. My first instinct, the instinct of every mother, was to smooth it over. To give him the easy answer. We protect. We redirect. I wanted to say, "Of course, you were my joy." But something in his face stopped me. He wasn't accusing me. He wasn't digging for drama. He was trying to understand the woman behind the mother. That question opened a door I hadn't planned to walk through that night. Memories came back in pieces. Long days, sleepless nights, choices made because someone had to make them. I realized how rarely anyone had asked me that question without expecting a tidy, happy answer. So I told him the truth. Or at least, the truest version I had in that moment. I talked about love and responsibility. I talked about how fear and hope often live side by side in a mother's heart. I spoke about the immense pride I felt watching him grow, but also about the parts of myself I had set aside without ever really meaning to. He listened. He really listened. No interruptions, no judgment, just presence. In that quiet kitchen, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No tears spilling over. Just a quiet understanding settling between us, steady and respectful. We were two adults connected by history, finally choosing honesty. Later that night, after he went to bed, I sat alone with my thoughts. The house felt different. Not fuller, not emptier, just clearer. His question stayed with me, echoing softly. It reminded me that even the most ordinary visits can carry moments that change how you see yourself. The next morning arrived gently, the way mornings do, when no one is in a hurry. I woke before him, my body still trained by decades of early starts. The house was quiet, except for the floorboard that always creaked under my step in the hallway. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and stood by the window, watching a delivery truck crawl down the street, the driver waving at no one in particular. I kept thinking about his question. It had settled into me overnight, not like a thorn, but like a smooth stone you turn over in your pocket. Was I happy? It wasn't a question I'd ever allowed myself to sit with for very long. There was always something else to do, someone else to consider. When he came into the kitchen, hair still rumpled from sleep, he smiled. That same crooked smile he'd had as a teenager. He poured himself coffee, without asking, muscle memory guiding his hand. That small familiarity made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't quite name. We talked about nothing at first. The weather. A neighbor who had repainted their fence a strange shade of blue. He mentioned a diner he remembered from childhood that had closed down. Ordinary talk. But underneath it, I could feel both of us choosing our words more carefully. Finally, he put his mug down. He thanked me for being honest the night before. He admitted that he'd wondered for years if he had asked too much of me without realizing it. I wanted to tell him that love doesn't keep score. That raising him had been the truest thing I'd ever done. Instead, I told him that asking the question mattered more than the answer. We took a walk later, down the same streets I once walked pushing a stroller, then holding a small hand, then trailing a moody teenager who pretended not to know me. The trees were taller now, the sidewalks more cracked. Time leaves its marks everywhere if you know how to look. He talked about his life, not the polished version, but the honest one. The doubts. The moments of standing still while everyone else seemed to move forward. I listened the way I wish someone had listened to me years ago, without trying to fix it, without rushing him. At one point, he stopped and looked at a house we used to pass every day. He asked if I ever wondered what my life would have been like if I'd chosen differently. I told him I used to wonder all the time. Then, one day, I realized that wondering didn't mean regretting. It just meant I was human. That seemed to settle something between us. Not answers exactly, but permission. Permission to see each other clearly, without roles getting in the way. When we got back, his suitcase was still by the door, waiting. The visit wasn't over yet, but I already knew this one would stay with me. Some conversations don't end when the words stop. They keep unfolding quietly, shaping the days that follow. That afternoon stretched longer than either of us expected. The sky turned that pale, washed-out blue that always reminds me of old photographs. We sat on the back porch with the screen door propped open, listening to the distant sound of lawnmowers and a dog barking 2 houses down. Familiar noises. Anchors. He asked if I still kept the old box in the hall closet, the one with drawings, report cards, and ticket stubs. I laughed, a little embarrassed. Of course I do, I said. Some things you don't throw away, because they're not really clutter. They're proof. We spread the contents out on the small table between us. Paper yellowed with age. Crayon lines bold and unapologetic. He picked things up slowly, handling them like they might break. Every now and then he'd pause, shake his head, and smile at something I'd forgotten entirely. A note I'd written excusing a late assignment. A photo from a school play where his smile looked nervous but proud. He grew quiet for a while. I didn't interrupt. Silence has its own language when you let it speak. Finally, he said he'd always assumed I was stronger than everyone else. That I didn't need help. That I had it all figured out. I told him that strength often looks like certainty from the outside, even when it's built on questions. Especially then. There was a moment, sitting there with the past laid out between us, when I felt something loosen inside me. The story I had told myself for years began to change shape. I wasn't just the caretaker in those memories. I was a woman navigating her own unknowns, doing the best she could with what she had. He thanked me again, but this time it sounded different. Not gratitude out of obligation, but recognition. It was like seeing someone fully for the first time. As evening settled in, the air cooled and the porch light flickered on. We talked about the future carefully, without pressure. He said he wanted to visit more. I said the door was always open, and I meant it in more ways than one. When night finally wrapped around the house, I realized how rare it is to have these moments. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. The kind that don't announce their importance until much later. I went to bed that night with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. Whatever tomorrow brought, something essential had already been shared. Morning came too quickly, the way it does when you know goodbye is waiting. I heard him moving around before I opened my eyes, the soft sounds of drawers and zippers. For a moment, I stayed still, letting the house breathe. It felt fuller than it had in years. It felt like it remembered what it was built for. We ate breakfast standing up, leaning against the counter. No rush. Even though there was a schedule somewhere in his pocket, he told me what the rest of his trip looked like. I listened, noticing how his voice carried more ease than it had when he arrived. At the door, there was that familiar pause. The kind that only happens when both people know something important has already been said, and there's no need to add more. He hugged me, firm and unhurried. Not the quick kind. The kind that says, "I see you." After he drove away, I stayed on the porch longer than usual. The street looked the same, but I didn't. His question, simple as it was, had rearranged something inside me. It didn't erase the past or rewrite it. It softened it. It gave it dimension. It allowed me to hold my younger self with a little more kindness. Later that day, I pulled out a notebook I hadn't opened in years. I wrote a few lines, nothing polished. Just truths about who I was then, about who I am now, and about how love changes shape but never really leaves. I realized that happiness isn't a fixed place you arrive at and stay forever. It's moments. It's conversations. It's being brave enough to answer honestly when someone asks a real question. That visit taught me something I didn't know I still needed to learn. That growth doesn't stop when the house gets quiet. That connection can deepen even after the years have stretched long between shared breakfasts and bedtime stories. And sometimes, the most ordinary visits carry the questions that stay with you for a lifetime.